October 31, 1944. Vueling Causeway, Dutch lands. The rain hasn't ceased for 3 days, and the wind cuts in off the shelf like a blade. Sergeant William Bill Harrow of the 6th Field Company, Royal Canadian Engineers, wipes a crust of mud from his eyelashes and leans into the roaring darkness. Somewhere ahead, beyond the silhouettes of shattered farmhouses, a solitary dike stands between his team and the German fortifications guarding the flooded island. A flare arcs over the horizon, green, hissing, reflected in slick pools of seawater that already cover half the road. "Christ," Corporal Mloud mutters beside him, adjusting the charge pack on his shoulder. "Feels like the whole damn North Sea is breathing on us." Bill doesn't reply. He's watching the dike. The Canadians have blown dikes before. Small ones, farm trenches, controlled breaches to drain or block fields. But this is different. The Dutch seawalls are living giants centuries old, constructed layer by men who battled the ocean the way soldiers battled armies. And tonight, the engineers intend to open a wound in one of them. Behind Bill, the columns of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division slog through ankle-deep water. Bren carriers hiss, their tracks churning mud into gray slurry. Somewhere in the dark, the distant boom of naval guns from the Royal Navy's support squadron rattles the ground. Major James Rohr steps forward, coat flapping violently in the wind. "All right, lads," he shouts above the storm. "This breach has to be precise. One pocket detonated, then we fall back before Jerry realizes what we're up to." Mloud spits rainwater. He'll figure it out the second the tide gets greedy. Bill sets his hand on the cold steel of the Bangalore torpedoes strapped together like a bundle of spears. This was supposed to be a minor operation, a tactical cut in the dike to force German troops off the elevated ground. But reconnaissance photos hinted at something else: the tide schedule, the height of the storm surge, and the weakened soil from weeks of shelling. If the engineers miscalculate it by even a few inches, the sea might do far more than they anticipate. The squad advances. Boots splash. Water slaps the stone wall like an animal begging to be admitted. Bill kneels, sliding the torpedoes into a narrow gap where earlier artillery fire had fractured the dike's outer shell. Mloud's hands quiver, not with fear, but with cold. The wind smells of salt and rotting seaweed, carried miles inland by the tempest. "Fuses set," Bill says. Rohr gives a curt nod. "All right, fire in the hole." The night erupts, a flash of orange behind the dike, a roar that drowns even the storm. The ground lurches beneath them as if the earth itself shudders. Chunks of stone arc into the sky. A wall of spray blasts outward, drenching the sappers as they scramble back. The dike groans, a sound too alive for soil and timber, and then collapses inward. For a moment, nothing. Only rain, only wind. Then they hear it. A deep rising rumble. The ocean pouring through a wound. Water surges like a charging beast, slamming into the breach, rushing inland in a foaming tidal wave that instantly engulfs the road. The engineers stare wide-eyed as the surge accelerates, sweeping over fields, tearing through hedgerows, lifting abandoned carts and telephone poles like toys. Mloud's voice cracks. "Jesus, Bill, that's not a breach. That's a bloody flood." But there is something else on the wind now. Faint voices carried from the far side of the rising waters. Shouting, panicked German voices. Bill turns to Rohr. "Sir, I think we just trapped somebody out there." The major's jaw tightens. "Fall back. Everyone back to the secondary line." As the sappers retreat through water that climbs from their ankles to their shins in seconds, Bill glances over his shoulder. A whole pocket of land is disappearing. Lights flicker as German positions go dark beneath the flood, and the tide continues rising. He swallows hard. This was meant to push the enemy back, not consume them entirely. The rain eases only slightly as the sappers slog through the darkness, retreating toward the assembly point marked earlier with a dim lantern under a shattered willow tree. Behind them, the roar of the flood grows louder, like a living entity gaining confidence as it moves inland. Sergeant Bill Harrow stops to catch his breath. Water now swirls around his knees. In less than 10 minutes, the landscape behind them has transformed from farmland to a rapidly expanding black mirror under the moonless sky. Lieutenant Rohr lifts his binoculars, wipes the lenses with a soak sleeve, and peers toward the breach. "What do you see, sir?" Bill asks, chest heaving. Rohr lowers the glasses slowly. "Not a breach," he says. "A channel, a bloody new river." The wind shifts from across the widening water. Gunfire crackles, but irregular, frantic, uncoordinated. Shadows of men run along the far ridge. Tiny silhouettes cut off by the rushing tide. Loud squints. Those Germans are stranded on the wrong side. They can't retreat to Vuhlerin. The floods cut their final exit. Rohr gives a grim nod. They're not withdrawing anywhere. They're trapped between our lines and the sea. A runner splashes toward them. Private Thompson, soaked to the bone, clutching a radio set twice the size of his torso. "Sir, message from brigade headquarters." He shouts over the storm. German units in West Capella are sending distress signals. Something about uncontrolled inundation. Their words, "Sir," Bill exchanges a glance with Mlaud. "Uncontrolled?" He mutters. "That's one way to put it." Thompson continues, catching his breath. "They think we planned it, sir. They're claiming Canadian engineers weaponized the sea." Rohr snorts bitterly. "If only they knew. We barely meant to poke a hole." But the hole is no longer a hole. It is now a wound expanding by the second. A distant explosion erupts across the water. German ammunition cooking off after being submerged. Flashes illuminate the dark outlines of sandbags collapsing, positions crumbling, men scrambling onto rooftops of half-submerged barns. Bill's heart sinks. "Sir, those aren't just trenches flooding. Those are billets. That's an entire platoon." The wind carries another sound. The rhythmic clank of steel on steel. German armored cars attempt to reverse out of the depression. Engines screaming, water climbing over their wheels. One slips sideways, tips, and vanishes beneath the surge. Mlaud shakes his head in disbelief. "We didn't flood their trenches. We flooded their bloody army." Rohr stiffens. "We're not celebrating this. The Dutch will suffer for every meter of that water. But if this breaks the German hold on the Scheldt, it opens Antwerp. The entire Allied advance hinges on clearing this estuary." Bill looks back at the flood. "But the scale, sir. The maps never indicated it rising this high." Rohr exhales sharply. "That's because the maps were drawn before 2 weeks of relentless rain." A booming crack splits the air. Another section of the ancient dike gives way, collapsing like a spine snapping. The flood accelerates again, splitting into two foaming currents that rush toward low-lying German positions further inland. German flares burst overhead, red, then white, then green, signaling emergency after emergency. They reflect off the surface of the water, transforming the entire plain into a churning, shimmering battlefield. The sappers watch in stunned silence. Bill swallows. "Sir, what do we do now?" Rohr's answer is simple, soft, and heavy. "Now we report what we've done and pray our own men aren't standing anywhere that water intends to go." Before anyone can speak again, a new figure approaches, panting. Captain Arthur Glenwright, liaison officer from the North Shore, New Brunswick Regiment. His greatcoat hangs in tatters, soaked through. "Rohr, the Germans on the higher ridge are surrendering. They can't withdraw. The water cut their link to the causeway. They're shouting that the sea is fighting for Canada." Mlaud snorts in disbelief. "Nature turning against them. That's what they're claiming." Captain Glenwright nods grimly. "There's more. Prisoners report several companies have been completely isolated. Their commanders radio to Flushing that the Canadians have unleashed a catastrophic tide. Those are their exact words." Bill lets out a slow, uneasy breath as reality sinks in. They hadn't just altered the battlefield. They had rewritten its geography, behind them. The flood spreads, devouring everything. In its path, barns, orchards, trenches. German gun nests until the entire plain. becomes a single violent sea, and the Canadians, soaked, shivering, standing on the only dry elevation left, grasp the reality. Their small demolition operation has sparked a transformation so immense that the German army now believes the terrain itself has turned hostile. The water continues rising, and the night is far from over. The storm drags through the early hours, yet something in the atmosphere has shifted. The wind no longer feels like weather. It feels like consequence. Sergeant Bill Harrow stands on the newly formed shoreline where solid ground once stretched for kilometers. Now in the darkness, a vast inland sea churns with debris and the muffled echoes of distant German shouting. Captain Glenn Wright wipes rain and mud from his face. "Roar, you need to hear this. Regiment scouts just returned. They report the Germans on the eastern ridges have abandoned their machine gun emplacements. The water reached the firing steps. Forced them out." Roar nods grimly. They'll attempt to retreat to the higher dunes. If the flood doesn't cut them off first. No one voices it, but all understand. This isn't a battlefield anymore. It's an evacuation. Bill squints across the heaving black water. Several dark shapes move in the distance. Germans trying to wade, chest deep, rifles raised overhead. One vanishes suddenly beneath the current. Two others struggle toward a farmhouse roof where a handful of soldiers cling like castaways. Loud murmurs, voice quivering with cold or awe. Bill can't tell which. Look at them. They're battling the tide more than us. The wind carries the low metallic toll of bells. Dutch warning bells from distant villages, activated by rising waters. Their sound resonates over the landscape like mournful church chimes. Thompson adjusts his massive radio pack, shouting through static. "Sir, intercepted German transmission from Kotakirka district. They report entire companies incapacitated due to inundation. Their HQ requests whether the Canadians have additional flood charges ready." Roar laughs, but only from exhaustion. "We barely had enough explosives to open a single breach." Glenn Wright's eyes narrow. They don't know that. To them, this seems deliberate, coordinated. Bill feels an uneasy knot in his stomach. "Sir, if they think we can summon a flooded will, won't that alter how they fight?" "Already has," Glenn Wright says. Forward observers report German mortar teams have evacuated their positions. Floodwater destroyed their ammunition. Some are fleeing inland. A sudden crashing behind them draws attention. The fields that seemed stable are now collapsing under their own weight. The soil is saturated, water rising. A Bren carrier parked earlier on seemingly solid ground begins to tilt. Its crew leaps out, splashing to safety as the vehicle sinks halfway into the mud like a trapped beast. Bill approaches the edge, watches the armored vehicle disappear beneath swirling brown foam, muttering, "This place is turning into quicksand." "See sand," Loud corrects. "Never meant to be dry." The Germans constructed trenches where no trenches should exist. A flash of lightning illuminates the plain. What they see steals the breath from every man. From horizon to horizon, the entire expanse is underwater. Wooden crates, logs, ammunition boxes, farm implements, and entire sections of German fortifications drift like tiny islands. Far in the distance, 3 German trucks sit abandoned, water to their windshields. Roar whispers, "My God, that's an entire battalion's equipment lost." Glenn Wright swallows hard. "And men, don't forget the men. The Canadians have witnessed chaos before, DP Normandy, the Files Gap. But this is different. This is quiet chaos. Relentless, unstoppable, impersonal. The sea doesn't choose sides." Bill forces himself to concentrate. "Sir, if the tide continues rising, we need to check our own fallback paths. If we get trapped," as if summoned by his words, a distant rumble shakes the ground. Another seawall kilometers away collapses under pressure. The engineers hear it before seeing it. A deep resonant boom, followed by hollow collapse. Water accelerates again, swirling faster around their legs. Glenn Wright lifts his boots, grimacing. This will cut off the western road within the hour. Roar shouts to the nearby infantry. Pull back to the secondary ridge. Move. Radio the Highland Light Infantry. Tell them to reposition before the water reaches them. Men scramble, rifles slung, boots splashing, voices rising in urgency. Bill turns to grab a coil of signal wire, then freezes. A German officer stands on a slight rise barely 200 meters across the water. He is soaked, exhausted, intermittently illuminated by lightning. He raises both hands high, shouting something in broken English. Bill strains to hear. Mlaud frowns. What is he saying? Bill translates slowly, heavily. He says, "We surrender. The sea has claimed us." The officer's men, scattered, wet, terrified, slowly emerge from behind bits of ruined embankment and half-submerged sheds. They raise their hands too, forming a ragged silhouette of defeat against the rising waters. The sea laps at their waists. Roar exhales. All right, flag team, bring the white lamp. If they can reach us, we'll take them. Glenwright watches the water swirl under the German's feet. If they can reach us, he repeats softly. Lightning flashes again. More positions across the plain fall silent. More shapes appear on rooftops waving cloths or helmets. More lights flicker and die in submerged farmhouses. An entire German regiment hasn't been defeated. It has been erased. Bill feels the weight settling on him, the sheer scale of what they initiated with a bundle of torpedoes and a single command in the dark. He whispers almost to himself, "We didn't flood their army. We drowned their map." The sea continues rising, and dawn is still hours away. The night thins slowly, painfully, reluctant to reveal what it has wrought. A cold gray glow creeps over the horizon, illuminating the flooded Dutch lowlands inch by inch. Sergeant Bill Harrow stands rigid on the ridge, boots numb, uniform soaked, watching the world below take form in the half-light. What was once farmland is now a vast inland sea. What was once a battlefield is now drowned silence, broken only by the slosh of currents and the distant crack of collapsing timber. Mlaud joins him, teeth chattering. Feels like waking from a nightmare and finding it persists. Bill doesn't answer. He's staring at a floating German helmet, spinning slowly in the water like a compass needle without north. Roar approaches, rubbing his temples with cold, stiff fingers. "We've got reports from the Royal Winnipeg Rifles." He says their forward patrol found a group of Germans huddled in an attic. They surrendered immediately on seeing the maple leaf armband. Glenwright adds, a platoon from the Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders rescued 15 Germans from a barn roof. The water reached the rafters. Bill nods slowly. The flood isn't just a weapon. It's a sentence. Indiscriminate. Absolute. A crackle of static interrupts the stillness. Thompson adjusts the radio dials. "Sir, priceless intel from intercepted German communications at Wuhleren." He holds the radio closer so they can hear a grainy voice speaking in frantic, clipped German. "Ganze Abneider find Gordon." Glenwright looks to Bill. Bill translates quietly. "Entire sectors wiped out. No retreat paths. Enemy opened the dikes. The sea fights against us. Nature has become our adversary." Mlaud whistles low. "They think we control the tide. Like we're, I don't know, sorcerers." Another boom rolls across the plain as a barn collapses beneath the weight of water. Ripples travel outward in slow waves, disturbing floating debris, doors, crates, artillery shells, a broken bicycle. Bill points toward the northwest horizon. "Look over there." Glenwright raises his binoculars. A column of Germans, 20, maybe 30, trudges through waist-deep water, weapons held high. Each step a battle against sucking mud beneath. Faces pale, hollow. They head toward the Canadian positions, hands already half-raised in surrender. "The water trapped them overnight," Glenwright murmurs. "Cut their supply lines, drown their heavy weapons." Roar lowers his head. "This will break the island's resistance faster than any assault plan." A sudden shout draws their attention southeast. A Canadian dispatch rider rushes up the ridge on foot, motorcycle abandoned behind him, wheels submerged. "Sir, important," he gasps. Engineers surveying the breach say the tide will rise again at midday, higher than last night. Roar stiffens. Higher? Yes, sir. Last night's breach accelerated erosion on the secondary dikes. They could fail any hour. Glenn Wright swears under his breath. Meaning, Bill answers. Meaning the sea isn't finished yet. The dispatch writer nods grimly. Meaning we need to pull our units off any ground under 2 meters elevation. The water could surge another half-kilometer inland. Loud kicks at the mud. So the sea attacks both sides. No, Bill says quietly, watching German soldiers stumble through the rising light. It attacks the land, and we're just standing on it. A flock of blackbirds, displaced from nesting sites, screams overhead, circling above the drowned countryside like restless spirits. Cries echo eerily across open water. Thompson adjusts the radio again. More intel, sir. German commanders on Vuellarin instruct Western battalions to fall back to higher dunes or be lost to the tide. They request boats, any boats, to rescue stranded men. Roar exhales. They won't get enough. Not in time. Bill watches morning light strengthen, revealing more devastation. Dikes fractured like broken bones. Roads erased. German positions reduced to tiny islands of mud. 3 German soldiers cling to a telegraph pole, waving strips of white cloth. Another group stands atop a sunken truck, shouting desperately in German and broken English. Glenn Wright orders a flare fired into the sky to signal surrender will be accepted. The flare arcs upward, illuminating everything in a brief, brilliant red flash. Bill sees the truth instantly. This isn't victory. This is subtraction. The battlefield didn't change shape. It ceased to exist. And the Canadians are just beginning to grasp the consequences of what their nighttime demolition unleashed. Behind them, another seawall groans ominously. The tide returns, and this time it comes with the full weight of the North Sea. The second tide advances like a silent army. No storm, no wind, just a steady, unstoppable rise. The North Sea reclaiming the Dutch lands inch by inch. Sergeant Bill Harrow watches as water flows through the breach, thicker and faster than before, turning the flooded battlefield into an even deeper expanse of gray. Sunlight glints off rippling surfaces, reflecting broken machinery, dead livestock, and shattered timber. Roar studies the map laid across the hood of a half-submerged carrier, wheels swallowed by mud. Winnipeg rifle positions will be underwater within the hour, he says. Order them to pull back another 200 yards. Glenn Wright nods. Highland Light Infantry report Germans on dunes are sending white flags. They've run out of ammunition in dry land. Bill looks up sharply. All of them? Entire companies? Glenn Wright replies. Some never fired a shot. Flood took their mortars, MG-42S, radios. Thompson switches channels on the radio, frowning at frantic German chatter. Sir, new transmission. Their Western command instructed all units to seek safety on any elevation. They beg Walleran HQ for boats. He hesitates. They also claim Canadian engineers have turned the land against them. Mloud shakes his head. If only they knew we were as surprised as they are. A distant crack draws attention. Another section of the dike collapses. The sound deep, primal. Water surges inward, faster now, as if hungry. Flood expands like a lung inhaling. A Canadian rifleman shouts from the ridge, movement. Germans on northern rise. Bill lifts binoculars. A long line of German soldiers approaches, trudging through thigh-deep water. Some lean on each other. Others carry wounded men, boots dragging beneath surface. Not one holds a weapon. At the front, an officer clutches a mud-soaked field map above his head to keep it dry. Faces pale, exhausted, relieved. Bill lowers binoculars. They're done, he whispers. The sea cut them off from every road, trench, hope of holding the Scheldt. As Germans reach Canadian lines, they raise hands high. Some tremble, others stare blankly at water behind, as if afraid it will rise again. Officer speaks English with harsh accent. We surrender. We have no ground left. Glenn Wright accepts gesture, motions for stretcher bearers to assist wounded. Surrender silent, mutual, inevitable. Within an hour, more Germans arrive, in small groups or alone. One wades forward, boots tied around neck. Another clings to barn door like raft. Machine gunner sobs handing over empty MG-42 frame washed clean of ammunition during the night. Bill watches them pass, feeling far from triumph. Rohr joins him. This wasn't the plan, he says quietly. We meant to breach a dike, not unmake the land. Bill nods slowly, but the land was ready to fall apart. Rain, soil, pressure. One cut was all it needed. Rohr looks across endless water now glittering in gray morning. Germans were right about one thing, he says. Nature fought them harder than we ever could. A signal flare bursts west, bright yellow. Glenn Wright raises binoculars. Dutch 4th Commando reports more German positions on WWII evacuating toward dunes. They abandon coastal guns. Flooding cut supply routes. Bill exhales. So that's it. Skelt is ours. Rohr nods. Antwerp can finally open. This, he gestures to drowned landscape. This will shorten the war. But Bill keeps staring at water, faint outlines of drowned trenches beneath, rooftops barely visible above tide. We didn't just win a battle, he says softly. We changed a country's geography. A chilly wind sweeps across the ridge. German captives sit in groups under guard, sharing blankets with Canadian medics. Engineers start marking secure paths along the remaining dry ridges. Infantry units reposition before the next tidal cycle claims more terrain. The battlefield, if it can still be called that, has transformed into something else. A sea with recollections. Bill turns to Rohr. What now, sir? The major folds his map, tucks it beneath his arm. Now we wait for the water to determine what stays and what it carries away. He pauses. And we help the Dutch restore what we shattered and what the sea completed. The last of the German stragglers crosses the water, surrendering quietly to the Canadian lines. Some weep, some hobble, some merely stare at the rising tide behind them. Bill observes the scene unfold, boots sinking slowly into saturated earth that will not dry again for months. He murmurs to no one in particular. That morning, we genuinely did flood a German army by accident. The tide continues rising, and the war presses onward.